The wreckage of Outpost Epsilon 9 drifted in the darkness of space, a silent graveyard of shattered ships and frozen corpses. The remains of what was once a thriving human colony now floated aimlessly, torn apart by an unknown force. Broken hulls, shattered escape pods, and lifeless bodies hung in the void, untouched and forgotten. In the middle of this field of destruction, the U.S. Revenant remained hidden. A small stealth corvette, barely functional, its cloaking system flickering under the stress of battle damage. It was the only human vessel left. The rest of the fleet had been destroyed. Captain Elias Voss sat in his command chair, his face illuminated only by the soft red glow of emergency lights. His breathing was slow and controlled, his eyes scanning the wreckage on the holo display in front of him. They were trapped here. The Revenant had no allies left, no reinforcements coming. Just his ship, his crew, and the enemy that had massacred them all. No one knew what had attacked them. The distress calls from Epsilon 9 had been brief, filled with screams and static before being cut off. The fleet had arrived to investigate, only to be ambushed by something that moved like a shadow in the dark. Something silent, precise, unstoppable. Now, they were the only ones left. The bridge was silent. No one dared to speak. Every crew member knew that even the smallest sound could be the end of them. The enemy was still out there, somewhere in the darkness. Then the sensors picked up movement, a single, massive shape, emerging from the shadows of space. At first, it looked like a chunk of debris, just another piece of the destroyed fleet, slowly rotating in the void. But then, it moved with purpose. It was not debris. It was a ship, a predator. The dark vessel. No lights, no markings. Its surface was black as obsidian, absorbing every trace of light. It did not drift aimlessly like the wreckage around it. It moved with deadly precision. Voss's hands clenched into fists. He had seen it before, in the last moments of the battle. It had been the one responsible for wiping out his fleet. It had torn through their defenses like they were nothing. And now, it was hunting for survivors. The crew held their breath as the dark vessel glided through the wreckage, scanning for signs of life. Small drones detached from its hull, moving like mechanical insects, creeping through the ruins of human ships, searching. "Keep all systems offline," Voss whispered. "No movement, no transmissions, nothing." The crew obeyed. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the hum of the ship's engines had been reduced to a whisper barely noticeable. The enemy was close now. Too close. Through the bridge viewport, Voss could see it. The dark vessel was massive, its hull smooth and seamless, like a living thing rather than a machine. It had no windows, no visible weapons, just a black, endless surface that absorbed all light around it. Then, something changed. The ship stopped. It turned, and it was looking directly at them. Voss felt a chill crawl up his spine. The cloaking device was still active. There was no way they could have been seen. And yet, the dark vessel began to move toward them. "Sir," whispered Lieutenant Harper, her voice barely audible. "I think it knows we're here." Voss didn't answer. His mind raced. The enemy's technology was beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. If their cloaking had failed, if they had been detected, they had no chance. The enemy ship moved closer. Voss could see it in terrifying detail now. The black surface of the ship seemed to shift, like liquid metal. It wasn't just a warship. It was something alive. Then the comms flickered. A burst of static. And a voice. Cold. Mechanical. Inhuman. "There is no escape." Voss's heart pounded. The crew exchanged panicked glances. The enemy was communicating with them. It knew they were there. Then, without warning, the dark vessel unleashed its drones. Swarms of small, spider-like machines burst from its hull, moving straight toward the Revenant. They were fast, too fast. In seconds, they would be on top of them. There was no choice now. "Engines online. Move," Voss shouted. The Revenant roared to life. The cloaking field shattered as the ship's thrusters ignited, diving through the wreckage at full speed. Behind them, the dark vessel responded instantly. It moved like a phantom, gliding after them with terrifying speed. It was no ordinary ship. It didn't obey the laws of physics like human ships did. It moved like it was hunting. "Incoming fire," shouted Harper. A beam of pure darkness erupted from the enemy ship, tearing through the debris. Where it struck, metal didn't just explode. It vanished, erased from existence. "Hard evasive. Get us into the debris field," Voss commanded. The Revenant weaved through the wreckage, dodging between the remains of battleships, using the twisted metal as cover. The enemy's drones followed, swarming, trying to cut them off. Then another shock. "Captain, they're predicting our movements," shouted Lieutenant Kim. "They're adapting." Of course they were. The enemy wasn't just fast, it was learning. Voss's mind raced. They couldn't outfight it. They couldn't outrun it. That left only one option. A desperate gamble. "Lieutenant, prepare a full reverse thrust on my mark," he ordered. Harper's eyes widened. "Sir, if we stop now, they'll be on top of us in seconds." Voss stared at the holo display. His expression was unreadable. "Trust me." The dark vessel was closing in. Its drones swarmed, coming straight for the bridge. "Now," Voss shouted. The Revenant's engines reversed at full power. The sudden stop sent the pursuing drones crashing into the debris field. Some shattered instantly. Others spun out of control. The dark vessel, expecting its prey to keep running, overshot its target. For a brief moment, it was exposed. "Fire all torpedoes." The Revenant's weapons roared to life. Missiles launched, streaking toward the dark vessel. They struck the enemy ship dead on. A direct hit. For the first time, the dark vessel hesitated. Its hull rippled, its surface shifting like liquid metal, struggling to absorb the damage. And that was all the time they needed. "Get us out of here." Full burn. The Revenant blasted away, engines screaming. The dark vessel recovered fast, too fast. But for now, the humans had gained a precious few seconds of distance. Voss exhaled, his hand still gripping the console. This was not over. Not even close. The dark vessel had let them go once before. This time, it would not make the same mistake. The U.S. Revenant streaked through the darkness, engines burning at full power. The dark vessel was behind them, relentless, moving with unnatural precision. It wasn't just chasing them, it was stalking them, like a predator playing with its prey. Captain Elias Voss gritted his teeth, staring at the holo display. The enemy wasn't firing anymore. It didn't need to. It was waiting for them to make a mistake. The Revenant was fast, but it couldn't outrun something that didn't obey the same rules of physics. The dark vessel wasn't bound by inertia. It moved like a ghost, shifting through space with terrifying efficiency. "Status on cloaking?" Voss asked, his voice tense. "Still offline," Lieutenant Harper replied. "It took too much strain during the battle. We need at least 20 minutes to reboot the system." Voss exhaled sharply. They didn't have 20 minutes. A new alert flashed on the screen. Multiple small contacts. "Drones incoming," shouted Kim. The enemy's hunter drones were closing in, dozens of them, moving in a tight formation, surrounding the Revenant from all sides. Their sleek black bodies reflected no light, their movements precise and controlled. They had no visible weapons, but that didn't mean they weren't deadly. "We can't fight all of them," Harper said. "We're not going to fight," Voss replied. His mind was already working through possibilities, scanning the battlefield for any advantage. They couldn't outrun the dark vessel. They couldn't outgun it. That left only one option: outsmart it. Voss studied the wreckage around them. The remains of the human fleet drifted in massive chunks, torn apart by the enemy's first attack. Debris fields could be unpredictable. If they used it right, it could work in their favor. "Lieutenant, How many active decoy drones do we have left? 3, Kim answered. But they won't last long. The enemy will see through them fast. They don't have to last long, Voss said. Prepare to launch them on my mark. The dark vessel was still behind them, its massive form gliding effortlessly through space. It was watching, calculating. Voss clenched his jaw. He wasn't going to let this thing hunt them down like animals. If they were going to die, they were going to fight. Harper, cut main engines. Let us drift. Harper's hands hesitated on the controls. Sir, if we stop moving, they expect us to run. We do the opposite, Voss said. Cut the engines. Now. Harper exhaled and shut down the thrusters. The Revenant went silent. The sudden change in movement confused the enemy for a moment. The hunter drones, which had been closing in, hesitated. The dark vessel adjusted course slightly, as if trying to understand the new tactic. Now, launch the decoy drones. The Revenant fired 3 small, modified drones in different directions. Each one emitted a full human ship signature, mimicking the Revenant's energy output. To enemy sensors, it looked like the Revenant had suddenly split into 3 identical ships. For a brief moment, the battlefield was chaotic. The enemy drones broke formation, splitting off toward the false targets. It worked. The dark vessel hesitated. It wasn't omniscient. It had to process information, analyze it, and react. And in that brief window of confusion, the Revenant had one chance. Restart the engines. Full thrust, downward vector. The Revenant's engines roared back to life, and the ship suddenly dove downward, spinning into the thickest part of the debris field. The dark vessel reacted a second too late. It had been preparing to fire, but its shot missed, slicing through empty space where the Revenant should have been. Now they were hidden, at least for a few seconds. Status on the enemy? Voss asked. The drones are still scanning, Kim said. They haven't pinpointed us yet, but they will soon. We need more time, Harper muttered. If the cloaking system doesn't reboot, we're finished. Voss looked at the wreckage around them. There had to be a way to use this to their advantage. The debris field was dangerous. It was filled with unstable wrecks, loose fuel cells, and exposed reactor cores. One wrong move, and they'd become part of the wreckage. But so would the enemy. An idea formed in his mind. It was reckless, but so was dying. Harper, scan for any active fusion cores in the wreckage, Voss ordered. She frowned but obeyed, running a quick scan. A few seconds later, red markers appeared on the display. 3 reactor cores, still active but unstable. Those cores are unstable, Harper said. We get too close, and they'll... Exactly, Voss interrupted. Kim, prepare a remote detonation sequence. Target the largest one. You want to blow it up? Kim asked, wide-eyed. No, Voss said. I want them to blow it up. The hunter drones were still searching. The dark vessel was repositioning, trying to predict their movements. Voss knew what it was doing. This enemy wasn't just powerful, it was intelligent. It was learning. It was adapting. That meant it could also be tricked. Harper, prepare to broadcast a false distress signal. Make it sound like our engines are failing. She hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Ready. Send it. A garbled, artificial distress signal echoed through the wreckage. To the enemy, it would look like the Revenant was struggling to escape, exactly what it wanted to see. The dark vessel reacted immediately. It adjusted its course, moving toward the distress signal. The hunter drones followed, spreading out, scanning the area. Right past the unstable reactor core. Kim, detonate. Now. Kim pressed the trigger. The explosion was instant and devastating. A chain reaction ripped through the debris field, igniting fuel cells, setting off secondary explosions. Shockwaves tore through space, scattering drones like shattered glass. The dark vessel reeled, its smooth black surface rippling in reaction. It hadn't expected the trap. It hadn't calculated the explosion. For the first time, The enemy had made a mistake. The Revenant's crew held their breath. The wreckage was still burning, a field of fire and destruction surrounding them. For a few seconds, there was only silence. Then Kim whispered, "Did it work?" The sensors flickered. The dark vessel was still there, but it wasn't moving. It remained motionless, its surface shifting as if processing, recovering. Voss clenched his jaw. They had bought themselves seconds, maybe minutes, but the fight wasn't over. "How much longer until cloaking is back online?" he asked. Harper checked the systems. 3 minutes. They didn't have 3 minutes. Then something unexpected happened. The enemy ship did not pursue. It did not fire. It simply sat there, silent, watching. And then, for the first time since the battle began, it turned away. Voss narrowed his eyes. Why is it leaving? No one had an answer. The dark vessel disappeared into the shadows, vanishing like a ghost into deep space. The hunter drones, now without orders, self-destructed. The enemy had let them go. Or perhaps it had learned enough. Voss exhaled. This wasn't victory. This wasn't survival. This was just the beginning. Silence filled the bridge of the U.S. Revenant. The dark vessel had disappeared into the void, but its presence still lingered like a shadow in the minds of the crew. No one spoke. No one celebrated. This wasn't victory. It was survival. Temporary, fragile, and uncertain. Captain Elias Voss stared at the holo display, watching the last known coordinates of the enemy ship. It had let them go. Why? That question refused to leave his mind. The enemy had shown no mercy before. It had wiped out entire fleets, destroyed colonies, hunted them down without hesitation. So why now? His hands curled into fists. He didn't like it. Behind him, Lieutenant Harper let out a shaky breath. "Cloaking is back online," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "We should leave before it changes its mind." Voss nodded. "Bring the system online. Full stealth mode." The Revenant shimmered, fading into the darkness. To any outside observer, it was now invisible, a ghost ship drifting through the wreckage. But the damage was done. They had lost too many. The fleet was gone. The colony was gone. They were alone. A soft beep interrupted his thoughts. "Captain," Kim said from the sensor station, "I'm picking up a weak distress signal. It's human." Voss turned sharply. "From where?" Kim's fingers danced across the console. "About 30,000 kilometers from here. It's coming from one of our ships, or what's left of it." He paused, then added, "It's the Argos." Voss's chest tightened. The Argos had been one of the lead battleships in their fleet. If there were survivors aboard, they had to move fast. "Set course," he ordered. "Let's bring our people home." The Revenant drifted through the graveyard of ships, moving carefully through the debris. The wreckage was massive. Twisted metal, floating bodies, the remains of what had once been a proud fleet. The silence made it worse. There were no active signals, no signs of life. Just the cold void, indifferent to the slaughter that had taken place here. And then they saw it. The Argos was barely intact. Its once mighty hull was now split open, leaking atmosphere and fire into space. It was still drifting, caught in a slow, endless spiral. There was no power, no lights, just the weak distress beacon pulsing in the darkness. Voss felt a pit in his stomach. They were too late. Harper scanned the wreck. "I'm picking up faint life signs. Very weak. Maybe 1 or 2 survivors. 1 or 2. Out of a crew of thousands." Voss didn't hesitate. "Prepare the airlock. Get a boarding team ready. We're going in." Minutes later, suited up in exo-armor, Voss and a small team crossed the void, using thruster packs to navigate toward the ruined ship. The sight up close was even worse. The hull was torn open like a gaping wound, revealing twisted metal and shattered corridors. They entered through a breach in the side, stepping into the dark remains of the Argos. Inside, It was a tomb. Bodies floated in the weightlessness, their faces frozen in expressions of pain, fear, or shock. Some were burned beyond recognition. Others had been killed by decompression, their bodies twisted from the vacuum of space. Blood floated in small red spheres, shimmering in the dim emergency lights. Harper swallowed hard over the comms. She didn't finish. They moved carefully through the wreck, scanning for survivors. Every step felt heavier, even in zero gravity. These had been their people, their friends, their brothers and sisters in arms. And they had died for nothing. Then, a weak signal pinged on Voss's HUD. "Over there," he said, pushing forward. The group moved toward a sealed compartment. The door was barely holding, bent and damaged. Inside, there was movement. Someone was alive. "Hold on," Voss shouted, placing a cutting tool against the door. Sparks flew as the metal groaned under the heat. The door gave way, and they rushed inside. A man was slumped against the wall, barely conscious. His suit was leaking oxygen. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. "Lieutenant Bonner." Voss knelt beside him. "Bonner, can you hear me?" Bonner's eyes flickered open. It took him a moment to recognize Voss. When he did, a weak smile crossed his face. "Captain," his voice was barely a whisper. "We've got you," Voss said. "We're getting you out of here." Bonner shook his head. "No time. They're coming." Voss's blood ran cold. "Who's coming?" "The dark vessel," Bonner breathed. "It didn't leave. It's watching. Studying us." His fingers dug into Voss's suit. "It let you go, to see what you would do next." Voss felt a chill crawl down his spine. The enemy was playing with them, testing them. And now it was coming back to finish the job. A new alarm blared over the comms. "Captain." Kim's voice came through, urgent. "We just picked up a massive energy spike. It's the dark vessel. It's coming back. Fast." Voss turned to Harper. "How long until it gets here?" 2 minutes, maybe less." There was no time. "We have to go." Voss grabbed Bonner, hauling him up. "Move." They rushed back through the ship, pushing off the walls, thrusters firing. The dark vessel was coming. The Revenant would have to leave. Now. As they reached the breach, Voss heard Bonner cough, blood trickling from his lips. He was fading fast. Then Bonner stopped moving. Voss turned in panic. "Bonner." Bonner looked at him, calm now. "You don't have time." Voss's heart pounded. "We're not leaving you." Bonner gave him a weak smile. "Yes, you are." Before Voss could stop him, Bonner pushed himself away, back into the ship. "What are you doing?" Voss shouted. Bonner activated his thrusters, heading toward the reactor core. Voss realized what he was about to do. "Bonner, don't." Bonner's voice came through the comms, weak but steady. "You survive. You fight. You make them pay." Then he was gone. Voss clenched his teeth, rage and grief burning inside him. He wanted to go after him, to stop him, but there was no time. "Get back to the ship," he ordered. The team launched toward the Revenant. Behind them, the Argos began to glow. Bonner had manually overloaded the reactor. As the Revenant's airlock sealed, Harper whispered, "Sir, he's still in there." Voss didn't answer. Seconds later, the Argos exploded. The shockwave tore through space, blinding white light engulfing everything. The dark vessel was caught in the blast, its shadowy form twisted, struggling against the force of the explosion. Its liquid-like hull rippled, and for the first time, it faltered. Voss watched in silence. Bonner had given them a chance to live. But the war was far from over. The explosion from the Argos had been massive, a blinding inferno that spread through the wreckage like wildfire. For a moment, the dark vessel had been caught in the blast, its smooth black surface rippling from the shockwave. The Revenant's crew had watched in silence, hoping, praying that it was enough to destroy the enemy. But deep down, Captain Elias Voss knew better. And then the sensors confirmed it. "It's still there," Kim said, his voice tight with fear. "The dark vessel is still intact." Voss clenched his jaw. He wasn't surprised. The enemy wasn't like any ship they had faced before. It didn't follow the same rules. It adapted. It survived. And now, it was coming for them. "Captain," Harper's voice was urgent. "We need to move. Now." Voss didn't hesitate. "Full burn. Get us out of here." The U.S. Revenant roared to life, its engines firing at maximum thrust. The ship spun away from the explosion, diving deeper into the debris field. Behind them, the dark vessel began to move, its unnatural shape gliding through the wreckage, unharmed. Its hunting drones detached from its hull, dozens of them, swarming like black insects, moving with deadly precision. "It's deploying drones," Kim reported. "They're spreading out, trying to surround us." Voss's eyes flicked to the navigation screen. They needed an escape route. Fast. Then he saw it. A storm. Not a regular storm, an ion storm. A massive one, swirling with crackling blue energy, its charged clouds stretching across the sector like a chaotic ocean. No sane pilot would enter it. The storm's violent surges could fry electrical systems, disrupt sensors, and turn any ship into drifting scrap metal. But Voss wasn't looking for a safe route. He was looking for a way to survive. "Set course for the ion storm," he ordered. Harper's head snapped toward him. "Sir, that storm is—" "I know what it is," Voss said, his voice firm. "But the enemy doesn't care about safe routes. If we fight them here, we die. Inside that storm, we have a chance." Harper hesitated for half a second, then nodded, adjusting course. The Revenant turned sharply, accelerating toward the growing wall of blue lightning. The storm loomed ahead, a swirling mass of chaos, arcs of electricity flashing through its thick clouds. Behind them, the dark vessel didn't stop. It was following, chasing. "They're still on us," Kim warned. Drones closing in fast. Voss's grip tightened on the armrest. "We'll lose them in the storm." The Revenant plunged into the ion storm. Instantly, the ship shuddered as energy surged through its hull. The view screens flickered, static rippling across them. The external lights dimmed, and the engines sputtered for a brief moment before stabilizing. "Shield levels dropping," Harper reported. "This storm is ripping through our defenses." Voss gritted his teeth. They were flying blind now. The storm's interference was messing with their sensors, reducing their visibility to almost nothing. They could barely see past their own ship's hull. But the enemy? It was still coming. Detecting multiple fast-moving contacts, Kim said, struggling to get a clear read. "The drones, some of them are still tracking us." "How?" The storm should have disrupted their systems as well. But these drones were unlike anything they had ever encountered. They were adapting, learning. Voss knew they had to act fast. "Divert emergency power to the engines," he ordered. "We need more speed." Harper adjusted the controls. The Revenant surged forward, weaving through the storm, dodging between floating chunks of ionized debris. The electric clouds crackled with blue lightning, arcing dangerously close to the ship. Then, a warning alarm blared. "Drones inbound," Kim shouted. "They're attacking." Suddenly, black shadows emerged from the storm. Enemy drones, their sleek bodies cutting through the turbulence like knives. They weren't just following anymore. They were striking. A sharp impact rocked the Revenant. "Direct hit on the aft section," Harper yelled. "They're trying to disable our engines." Voss's mind raced. If they lost power now, they were dead. They needed a counterattack. Fast. "Arm rear cannons," he ordered. "Target the drones manually." Kim adjusted the controls, trying to get a lock despite the interference. The first shots fired, missed. The storm was messing with their targeting systems. The drones were too fast, too precise. Another hit shook the ship. Sparks flew across the bridge. "We won't last at this rate," Harper warned. Voss exhaled sharply. They needed another gamble. His eyes flicked to the navigation map. Ahead, deep inside the storm, was a massive swirling vortex of energy. The storm's core, a place where the electromagnetic interference was so strong that even automated systems would fail. If the Revenant could reach that point, the enemy drones might lose their tracking ability. But so would they. "Harper, take us into the storm's core," Voss ordered. Her hands froze over the controls. "Sir, if we go in there, we won't be able to navigate." Voss's jaw clenched. "Neither will they." Harper swallowed but obeyed. The Revenant adjusted its trajectory, diving deeper into the storm. The lightning around them intensified, flashing dangerously close. The ship's hull groaned under the stress. The internal lights flickered again. "Hold steady," Voss commanded. Behind them, the drones kept coming. The dark vessel itself had not entered the storm, but its hunters had. And then, the Revenant reached the storm's core. Everything went white. The ship lurched violently as the interference overwhelmed all systems. The external cameras failed, the HUD scrambled, and for a moment, there was nothing but chaos. And then, silence. Harper's hands flew across the console. "We've lost sensors. I can't see anything outside the ship." Kim checked the radar. "The enemy drones. They're gone. The interference must have shut them down." Voss exhaled. The gamble had worked. But now they were flying blind. For several tense seconds, the ship drifted, lost in the storm. Lightning still crackled around them, but the pursuit was over. Then, a soft beep. "I'm picking up an energy signature," Kim said cautiously. "But it's not enemy. It's something else." Voss frowned. "What kind of energy signature?" Kim hesitated. "I don't know, but it's old. Really old." Voss's pulse quickened. Whatever it was deep inside the storm. And if it was still active after all this time, it might just be their way out. The U.S. Revenant drifted in the heart of the ion storm, surrounded by crackling energy and swirling electromagnetic chaos. The storm had swallowed everything. The enemy drones, their sensors, even the stars beyond. For a moment, they were alone in a sea of static, their ship barely holding together. Captain Elias Voss leaned forward, staring at the flickering holo display. The energy signature they had detected was still there, hidden somewhere in the storm. It was weak, barely readable, but it was old. Far older than anything human ships should have been picking up in deep space. "Are we still blind?" he asked. Lieutenant Harper's fingers danced across the controls. "Mostly. Sensors are still scrambled, and we're getting interference across all systems. But," she hesitated, "I think we can get a visual if we adjust our scanning frequency." "Do it," Voss ordered. Harper twisted the controls, shifting the scanner frequencies through the electromagnetic waves. At first, nothing changed, just a wall of static. Then, something appeared. A massive structure slowly materialized on the holo display, a shape buried deep within the storm, hidden for centuries. The bridge went silent. "What is that?" Kim whispered. Voss stared at the image. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't an asteroid. It was something else. "Give me a full scan," he said. Harper nodded, running a deep scan through the interference. It took several seconds for the data to come through, distorted and broken, but enough to confirm the impossible. "This structure, it's human," she said. Voss's chest tightened. That didn't make sense. There were no recorded human colonies or stations this far out in deep space. "How old?" he asked. Harper checked the readings, then hesitated. "Sir, this structure is over 200 years old." The words sank in like ice. Voss exchanged looks with his crew. No one spoke, but they all understood what this meant. This was not a recent colony, not a hidden research base. This was something that predated their own fleet, something that shouldn't exist. And yet it did. Voss made his decision. "Set a course," he ordered. "We're going in." The Revenant slowly approached the ancient structure, its engines barely responding in the thick storm. As they got closer, the details became clearer. The station was massive, stretching several kilometers in all directions. It was covered in battle scars, deep gashes running along its metal surface. Some sections were completely destroyed, ripped apart by what looked like energy weapons. But despite the damage, it was still intact, still standing after all this time. Then they saw something that sent chills down their spines. A symbol on the station's hull, a faded human insignia. Harper gasped. That's an old Terran Defense Force logo. From the pre-Exodus era. Voss felt a pit in his stomach. The pre-Exodus era was before humanity's great expansion into the stars, a time when Earth's forces had been fighting wars they barely understood, against enemies they had long since buried in history. But if this station was here, it meant the past wasn't buried at all. Kim's voice was tense. "Sir, I'm detecting a weak signal, coming from inside the station." Voss turned sharply. "A distress signal?" "No," Kim said, shaking his head. "It's not an emergency beacon. It's a message." Voss narrowed his eyes. "Put it through." A burst of static filled the bridge speakers, broken and distorted. Then a voice, human, echoed through the ship. "This is Commander Renford of Outpost Genesis. If anyone is receiving this message, know that humanity's greatest mistake has come back. The war never ended. We only ran." Silence followed. The crew sat frozen, absorbing the words. Harper's voice was barely a whisper. "What does that mean?" Voss didn't answer. He was still processing it himself. The war never ended. 200 years ago, humanity had fought something, and instead of winning, they had run. Kim checked his console. "Sir, the message is old, at least 2 centuries. But the station is still powered. Barely." He hesitated, then added, "And I'm detecting one faint life sign inside." Voss's eyes snapped to him. "One survivor." Kim nodded. "It's weak, almost unreadable. But someone, or something, is still in there." Voss exhaled. This just kept getting stranger. A dead station buried in a storm, sending out an ancient warning. And now, a survivor. He made his decision. "We're boarding." A few minutes later, Voss and his team were suited up, preparing to enter the station. The airlock doors groaned as they connected to the structure's outer hatch. Dust and ice coated the metal, untouched for centuries. With a final breath, Voss hit the controls. The hatch hissed open. Inside, the station was a frozen graveyard. The corridors were dark, silent, filled with floating debris and frozen bodies. The air was stale, thin and heavy with the scent of decay. The walls were covered in old human writing, faded mission logs and security warnings. And then the lights flickered. "Something's still running in here," Harper said, her voice uneasy. They moved carefully through the halls, weapons raised. The deeper they went, the stronger the feeling of something watching them became. Then they reached the command center. The doors were half open, jammed by debris. Voss forced his way through, stepping into the ancient control room. And that's where they saw him. A man, sitting in a chair, frozen in place, barely breathing. His suit was ancient, a design that hadn't been seen in 200 years. His face was gaunt, pale, his eyes half open but unfocused. Voss stepped forward, kneeling beside him. "Who are you?" he asked. The man's lips trembled. His voice was weak, barely more than a whisper. "You came back." Voss frowned. "What do you mean?" The man slowly turned his head, staring into Voss's eyes. "We thought we could run," he said. "We thought we could hide." Voss felt a chill. "From what?" The man shook his head. "Them." Then a new sound filled the station. A deep mechanical hum. Voss's comm crackled. Kim's voice came through, panicked. "Captain, you need to get out of there. The dark vessel. It's coming. And this time, it's not alone." Voss turned back to the survivor. The man smiled faintly. "It always finds us." And then the station came to life. The station hummed to life. Dim emergency lights flickered along the walls, casting eerie shadows through the cold, lifeless corridors. The ancient machinery groaned, shaking off centuries of dust as dormant systems reactivated. Captain Elias Voss felt his heartbeat quicken. Something was happening. Something big. Behind him, Harper and Kim raised their weapons, scanning the room for threats. The survivor, the man who had been frozen in time for 200 years, barely stirred. His breathing was ragged, his face pale, but his lips curled into a weak, knowing smile. "You woke it up," he whispered. Voss narrowed his eyes. "Woke what up?" Before the man could answer, Voss's comm crackled to life. "Captain." It was Lieutenant Carson, back on the Revenant, his voice tight with panic. "We have incoming, multiple enemy contacts. It's the dark vessel. And, sir, there's more of them." Voss's blood ran cold. The survivor coughed weakly. His voice barely carried over the alarms now blaring across the ancient station. "They always find us," he murmured, "no matter how far we run." Voss grabbed his shoulder, shaking him. "Who are they? What do they want?" The man's glazed-over eyes focused for a brief moment. "They don't want anything," he whispered. "They just erase." Then the station shook violently. A deep, rumbling vibration ran through the floor. Dust fell from the ceiling. Metal groaned under sudden pressure. Something outside had arrived. Kim checked his scanner, his face going pale. "Captain, they're surrounding us." Voss turned sharply. "How many?" Kim swallowed hard. "At least 10 dark vessels." Silence. No one spoke. No one breathed. One dark vessel had been enough to wipe out their fleet. Now there were 10. Voss clenched his jaw. They were out of time. "Get ready to move," he ordered. Harper stepped forward. "Sir, we can't just leave the station like this." "We don't have a choice," Voss snapped. "We need to get back to the Revenant. Now." He turned back to the survivor, who was still barely conscious. "Can you walk?" The man chuckled weakly. "I can try." Voss didn't wait for an answer. He grabbed the man by the arm, hauling him to his feet. Harper and Kim covered them as they hurried back toward the airlock. The station was falling apart. Emergency sirens blared. Pipes burst. Sparks rained from the ceilings. The whole place was tearing itself apart as long-dead systems struggled to function again. And outside, in the storm, the dark fleet was waiting. As they reached the airlock, Kim's comm buzzed again. "Sir, Revenant here. Shields are failing. They're locking weapons. We have to go now." Voss growled. They weren't going to make it. Unless... His eyes flicked to the station's central console. The old system was still running, barely holding together, but it was operational. And if it was operational, it could be used. "Harper, can this station's defenses still work?" he asked. Harper frowned, glancing at the flickering screens. She ran a quick diagnostic. Her eyes widened. "Maybe, yes. The old battle systems are online. But the weapons are outdated. They won't do much damage." "They don't need to," Voss said. "They just need to distract them." Harper hesitated. "You're thinking of activating the station's weapons." "I'm thinking of activating everything." Harper's hands hovered over the console. "Sir, this station is unstable. If we push it too hard, it cold." "I know," Voss said. "That's the point." Harper exhaled sharply. Then she nodded. "All right. I'll set the reactor to overload." "Do it," Voss ordered. Harper's fingers flew over the ancient controls. The station rumbled beneath them, power surging through systems that had been dead for centuries. The long-forgotten battle station roared back to life. A final stand. A final act of defiance. Reactor overload in 90 seconds, Harper said. Once it blows, it'll take out everything within a 100-kilometer radius. That was enough. Move, Voss shouted. The team sprinted back toward the Revenant's docked airlock. The ship's lights were flashing, alarms blaring. The dark vessels were charging weapons. Voss pushed the survivor ahead of him. Get on board. Harper and Kim followed, leaping through the hatch just as the airlock sealed behind them. Voss spun toward the bridge. Punch it. Get us out of here. The Revenant's engines ignited, propelling the ship away from the station at maximum speed. The crew watched from the bridge as the dark fleet prepared to fire. Then, the station exploded. A shockwave of energy ripped through space. The station, the wreckage, the storm, it all collapsed inward, then erupted outward in a burst of white-hot energy. The dark vessels reeled. Some were caught in the blast, their liquid-like hulls warping under the pressure. Others tried to escape, but the explosion swallowed them whole. And then, silence. The storm was gone. The dark vessels were gone. The bridge was dead quiet. No one spoke. No one moved. They had survived. Voss exhaled, stepping forward. The holo-display showed nothing but empty space. The wreckage was gone. The storm was gone. The enemy was, no, not gone. Just waiting. He turned to the survivor. Is it over? The man gave him a hollow, weary look. Then he shook his head. No. Voss clenched his fists. He had known the answer before he even asked. This wasn't over. This was only the beginning. The war they had forgotten. The war humanity thought it had escaped. It was coming back. And this time, there would be nowhere left to run.